Detective Inspector Marcus Blake had always believed that working for the Royal Protection Unit was the pinnacle of his career. After 15 years with the Metropolitan Police, climbing through the ranks from beat officer to detective, he had earned his place among the elite team responsible for safeguarding the British royal family. The job required absolute discretion, unwavering loyalty, and the ability to see threats that others might miss. On a cold February morning in 2023, Marcus arrived at his office in Scotland Yard's Specialist Operations Building. The morning briefing had been routine, covering the usual concerns about public events, threat assessments, and coordination with other security agencies. Nothing had prepared him for what would unfold when he returned to his desk to find a plain manila envelope marked "Confidential Eyes Only" sitting prominently on his keyboard. The envelope bore no return address or official stamps, just his name written in block letters across the front. Marcus examined it carefully, his training making him cautious about unexpected deliveries. The paper was standard office stock, the kind available anywhere, offering no clues about its origin. After checking with his colleagues to see if anyone had seen who delivered it, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing what appeared to be bank account details, dates, and a series of coded references that meant nothing to Marcus initially. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note. "Ask yourself why, Detective Chief. Inspector Harrison bought a house worth £800,000 on a civil servant's salary. The truth is in the royal household's private security files." No. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he read the note for the second time. Detective Chief Inspector David Harrison was his direct supervisor, a man he had worked under for 3 years and deeply respected. Harrison had been with the Royal Protection Unit for over a decade, earning commendations for his service and the trust of senior royals. The suggestion that he might be involved in financial impropriety seemed impossible, yet the specific mention of an MLD 800,000 house gave the allegation weight that Marcus couldn't ignore. He knew Harrison lived in an expensive area of London, but like most officers, Marcus had never given much thought to how his superior could afford such property on a police salary. The civil service pay scales were public information, and even at Harrison's rank, salary wouldn't typically support such a lifestyle. Marcus spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on his regular duties while the anonymous note burned. In his mind, he found himself studying Harrison during meetings, looking for any signs of guilt or unusual behavior. But his supervisor seemed exactly as he always had, professional, competent, and dedicated to protecting the royal family. The reference to royal household's private security files particularly troubled Marcus. These files contained sensitive information about the royal family's personal security arrangements, financial details, and private activities. Access was strictly controlled and monitored, with only the most senior officers having authorization to view certain documents. If Harrison was somehow exploiting his access to these files, the implications could be catastrophic for royal security. During lunch, Marcus walked through St. James's Park, trying to clear his head and think through his options. He could ignore the anonymous note, dismissing it as the work of someone with a grudge against Harrison. Many officers accumulated enemies during their careers, and false accusations weren't uncommon. But the specificity of the information and the mention of verifiable details like the house purchase made it difficult to dismiss entirely. Alternatively, Marcus could investigate the allegations quietly using his own access to police databases and public records to verify the claims. This approach would allow him to determine if there was any substance to the accusations before taking more drastic action. However, investigating a superior officer without authorization could end his own career if discovered. The most direct approach would be to report the anonymous tip to Internal Affairs or the senior command structure. This would trigger an official investigation and remove the burden of decision from Marcus's shoulders. But it would also destroy Harrison's reputation and career if the allegations proved unfounded. And Marcus would be remembered as the officer who brought down a respected colleague based on an anonymous accusation. That afternoon, Marcus found himself assigned to accompany Harrison on a routine security assessment at one of the royal residences. During the drive, Harrison seemed relaxed and talkative. sharing stories about his early days in the protection unit and his pride in serving the royal family. The conversation made Marcus feel sick, knowing what he knew but unable to address it directly. "You know, Marcus," Harrison said as they reviewed security protocols, "this job isn't just about keeping people safe. It's about preserving something bigger than ourselves. The monarchy represents continuity, tradition, stability. Sometimes we have to make difficult choices to protect those values." The comment struck Marcus as oddly philosophical for Harrison, who typically focused on practical security matters. Was there a hidden meaning in his words, or was Marcus reading significance into innocent remarks because of his heightened suspicions? Back at the office that evening, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for weeks to come. He used his computer access to run a basic property search on Harrison's address. The results confirmed what the anonymous note had claimed. Harrison lived in a house purchased 2 years earlier for £795,000. The timing of the purchase coincided with Harrison's promotion to his current position and his increased access to sensitive royal files. Marcus also discovered that Harrison had no obvious sources of additional income, no inheritance records, no side businesses, no wealthy family members who might have provided financial support. The house purchase appeared to represent a significant stretch even for someone at Harrison's salary level, particularly given the other expenses of London living. The evidence was circumstantial but troubling. Marcus realized he was facing a decision that would define the rest of his career and potentially affect the security of the royal family. If Harrison was corrupt, allowing him to continue in his position could compromise ongoing security operations. But if the allegations were false, Marcus's investigation could destroy an innocent man's life and reputation. As Marcus locked the anonymous note in his desk drawer that night, he knew he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. The next few days were torture for Marcus as he wrestled with what to do about the information in the anonymous note. He found himself analyzing every conversation with Harrison, looking for signs of deception or guilt. His superior seemed completely normal, discussing cases with his usual thoroughness and dedication. Making it even harder for Marcus to believe the allegations could be true, Marcus decided to conduct some discreet research into Harrison's background without using official police resources that could be traced back to him. He spent his lunch breaks visiting public libraries and internet cafes, piecing together information about his supervisor's life and career. What he discovered both reassured and worried him. Harrison's career record was exemplary. He had joined the Metropolitan Police straight from university, worked his way up through various departments, and had never been the subject of any formal complaints or disciplinary actions. His performance evaluations consistently rated him as outstanding, and he had received multiple commendations for his service. Colleagues from his previous assignments spoke highly of his integrity and professionalism. However, Marcus also noticed some patterns that seemed unusual. Harrison lived alone in his expensive house, having never married or had children. He drove a luxury car that appeared to be worth more than most police officers could afford. He took expensive holidays to exclusive destinations, often alone, which seemed odd for someone on a civil servant's salary. Most troubling was Harrison's lifestyle change that had occurred about 2 years earlier, coinciding with his promotion to the Royal Protection Unit. Before that time, Harrison had lived in a modest flat and driven an older vehicle. The sudden upgrade in his living standards corresponded exactly with his gaining access to the most sensitive royal security information. Marcus began to pay closer attention to Harrison's work habits and noticed some concerning patterns. His supervisor often stayed late at the office, claiming to be working on sensitive reports that required privacy. Harrison also volunteered for assignments that involved reviewing confidential royal household files, even when those tasks could have been delegated to other qualified officers. One evening, Marcus decided to test his suspicions by returning to the office after hours under the pretense of collecting some forgotten paperwork. He found Harrison alone in his office, working on his computer with several confidential files spread across his desk. When Marcus knocked on the door, Harrison quickly minimized whatever he had been viewing on his screen and shuffled the papers into a neat pile. "Marcus, what brings you back so late?" Harrison asked, his voice casual but his body language slightly tense. "Just grabbing some files I need for tomorrow's briefing," Marcus replied, trying to sound equally casual. "Working late again? You know how it is," Harrison said, with a forced smile. "These threat assessments won't write themselves. The royal family's security depends on getting every detail right." Marcus collected his papers and prepared to leave. He noticed that one of the files on Harrison's desk was labeled with a classification level that seemed higher than what would be needed for routine threat assessments. The glimpse was brief. Marcus was certain he had seen references to financial information and personal details about royal family members. The encounter left Marcus even more troubled. Harrison's behavior had definitely been defensive, and the presence of highly classified files during what was supposedly routine paperwork suggested something more significant was happening. Marcus realized he could no longer ignore his suspicions or hope they would resolve themselves. That weekend, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He contacted an old friend from his days in financial crimes, Detective Sergeant D. Sarah Chen, who now worked for a specialized unit investigating corruption within government agencies. Marcus arranged to meet Sarah at a quiet pub far from their usual haunts, where they could speak without being overheard by colleagues. Sarah listened carefully as Marcus explained his suspicions about Harrison, the anonymous note, and his subsequent observations. She asked detailed questions about the timing of Harrison's lifestyle changes, his access to sensitive information, and the specific concerns raised in the anonymous tip. Her expression grew increasingly serious as Marcus laid out the evidence. "This is potentially very serious, Marcus," Sarah said finally. "If a senior officer in the Royal Protection Unit is compromising security for financial gain, the implications go far beyond normal police corruption. We're talking about national security, the safety of the royal family, and the integrity of one of the most trusted institutions in the country." Sarah explained that investigating corruption within the Royal Protection Unit would require extraordinary care due to the sensitive nature of the work and the need to avoid compromising ongoing security operations. Any investigation would need to be conducted by the most senior levels of law enforcement, with oversight from intelligence services and possibly even the Cabinet Office. "You need to understand what you're potentially setting in motion," Sarah warned. "If you make this allegation formally, there's no going back. Harrison's career will be destroyed, even if the charges prove unfounded. Your own career will also be affected, either positively if you're seen as a hero who exposed corruption, or negatively if you're viewed as a troublemaker who made false accusations against a respected colleague." Marcus felt the weight of Sarah's words settling on his shoulders. He'd been focused on whether Harrison might be corrupt, but hadn't fully considered the broader implications of his decision. The investigation would inevitably become public knowledge within law enforcement circles, and the media attention could be intense if details leaked to the press. "There's another consideration," Sarah continued. "If Harrison is corrupt and you don't act, you become complicit in whatever damage he might cause. The royal family's security could be compromised, and you'd bear some responsibility for failing to prevent it when you had the chance." The conversation with Sarah crystallized Marcus's dilemma. He was trapped between two unacceptable outcomes, potentially destroying an innocent man's career based on anonymous allegations, or potentially allowing a corrupt officer to continue compromising royal security. Either choice carried enormous personal and professional risks. Sarah agreed to provide Marcus with guidance on how to approach the situation if he decided to move forward with his concerns. She outlined the proper channels for reporting suspected corruption within elite units, the evidence that would be required to support his allegations, and the protections available for officers who reported wrongdoing in good faith. As Marcus walked home through the London streets that night, he felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. In his pocket was Sarah's business card with her direct number, representing his pathway to making the allegation official. The choice he made in the coming days would define not only his own future, but potentially the career of David Harrison and the security of the institution they both served. Marcus spent a sleepless weekend agonizing over his decision. Every time he convinced himself to let the matter drop, he would remember Harrison's nervous behavior and the expensive lifestyle that seemed impossible on a police salary. When he decided to move forward with the allegations, he would think about Harrison's dedication to the job and the possibility that he was about to destroy an innocent man's life. It's based on an anonymous tip. Monday morning arrived with no resolution. To his internal conflict, Marcus went through his morning routine mechanically, showering, dressing, and eating breakfast, while his mind remained focused on the decision he had to make. The anonymous note had been in his desk drawer for nearly a week, and he couldn't continue indefinitely without taking action one way or another. At the office, Marcus found himself assigned to work closely with Harrison on a comprehensive security review for an upcoming royal engagement. The assignment would require them to spend most of the day together, reviewing threat assessments, coordinating with other agencies, and examining sensitive protocols. Marcus realized this might be his last opportunity to observe Harrison's behavior before making his final decision. During their work session, Marcus paid careful attention to how Harrison handled classified documents and interacted with sensitive information. His supervisor seemed entirely professional, treating each file with appropriate care and discussing security concerns with genuine expertise and concern. There were no obvious signs of duplicity or inappropriate interest in information beyond what was required for their legitimate work. However, Marcus did notice that Harrison seemed particularly knowledgeable about the financial arrangements and personal schedules of certain royal family members, details that weren't directly relevant to the security assessment they were conducting. When Marcus asked about this information, Harrison explained that understanding the broader context of royal activities was essential for effective protection planning. The explanation was reasonable, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Harrison's knowledge went beyond what would be expected, even for someone in his position. There was something in the way Harrison discussed certain details, familiarity that suggested he had spent considerable time studying information that wasn't directly related to his official duties. During lunch, Marcus made an excuse to step away from the office and called Sarah Chen from his mobile phone. He needed professional advice about how to interpret what he had been observing and whether his suspicions were justified or simply the product of his heightened awareness. Following the anonymous tip, Sarah listened carefully to Marcus's description of Harrison's behavior and asked several pointed questions about specific incidents and conversations. Her training in investigating corruption gave her insights that Marcus, despite his detective experience, might miss in this situation. "What you're describing could be explained by excessive diligence or genuine corruption," Sarah said thoughtfully. "The challenge is that both innocent and guilty behavior can look very similar in these circumstances. However, the pattern you've described, combined with the financial evidence from your earlier research, creates a picture that's worth investigating professionally." Sarah explained that Marcus was approaching the point where his informal observations would need to transition into formal reporting if he wanted to avoid potential accusations of failing to act on suspected corruption. The longer he delayed, the more difficult it would become to explain why he hadn't reported his concerns earlier. "You need to make a decision soon," Sarah advised. "If you're going to report this, the timing matters. Waiting too long could undermine your credibility and suggest that you weren't really convinced of the seriousness of your concerns." That afternoon, Marcus returned to work with a heavy heart, knowing that his time for indecision was running out. Harrison greeted him warmly, and they resumed their security review. But Marcus found it increasingly difficult to focus on their work while wrestling with his conscience. Near the end of the workday, an incident occurred that would finally force Marcus to make his decision. Harrison received a phone call that he claimed was from his sister, asking him to step away for privacy. Marcus noticed that Harrison seemed nervous about the call and spoke in hushed tones, glancing frequently toward Marcus's desk to ensure he wasn't being overheard. After Harrison finished the call and left the office early, claiming a family emergency, Marcus found himself alone in their shared workspace. Harrison had left his computer logged in, and several confidential files were still open on his screen. Marcus faced a moment of truth. He could respect his supervisor's privacy and simply log off the computer. Or he could look at what Harrison had been working on. Marcus's police training had taught him that corruption investigations often turned on small moments when evidence became available. He also knew that looking at Harrison's work without authorization would be a serious breach of protocol that could end his own career regardless of what he discovered. After several minutes of internal struggle, Marcus made his choice. He looked at Harrison's computer screen and immediately realized why his supervisor had been nervous about the phone call. The files Harrison had been reviewing contained detailed financial information about royal household expenditures, travel arrangements, and personal security costs, information that would be extremely valuable to certain types of criminals or foreign intelligence services. More disturbing was a document Harrison had been working on that appeared to summarize the sensitive information in a format that would be easily understood by someone outside the security services. The document contained no official letterhead or security classifications, suggesting it might be intended for unofficial distribution. Marcus quickly photographed the screen with his phone before Harrison could return and discover what he had seen. The evidence was circumstantial, but deeply troubling, providing the first concrete indication that Harrison might indeed be misusing his access to sensitive information. As Marcus drove home that evening, he knew his decision had been made for him. The evidence he had witnessed couldn't be ignored or explained away as innocent behavior. Harrison appeared to be compiling sensitive royal security and financial information for purposes that went beyond his official duties. Marcus called Sarah Chen as soon as he arrived home, explaining what he had discovered and asking for immediate guidance on how to proceed. Sarah's response was unambiguous. Marcus now had evidence of potential criminal activity that required immediate reporting to the appropriate authorities. You've crossed the line from suspicion to evidence, Sarah explained. You no longer have the option of keeping this to yourself. You have a legal and professional obligation to report what you've seen. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table drafting a formal report to the Director of Professional Standards, outlining his concerns about Harrison's behavior and the evidence he had gathered. With each word he typed, Marcus felt the weight of his decision settling more heavily on his shoulders. By morning, there would be no turning back from the course of action he was about to set in motion. The file that could end careers was about to be opened, and Marcus could only hope he was making the right choice. Marcus barely slept that night, reviewing his decision over and over while staring at the ceiling of his small flat. The formal report lay printed on his bedside table, ready to be submitted first thing in the morning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Harrison's face and imagined how devastated his supervisor would be when the investigation began. At dawn, Marcus made one final review of his report, ensuring every detail was accurate and that he hadn't overstated any of his observations. The document outlined the anonymous tip, his subsequent research into Harrison's financial situation, the behavioral patterns he had observed, and finally the evidence he had witnessed on Harrison's computer. Reading it back, the case seemed compelling, but Marcus still felt sick about what he was about to unleash. The Director of Professional Standards, Assistant Commissioner Janet Morrison, was known throughout the Metropolitan Police as someone who took corruption allegations seriously, but also protected officers from false accusations. Her office was located in a secure section of Scotland Yard, reflecting the sensitive nature of the work conducted there. Marcus arrived at Morrison's office at precisely 9 o'clock, having requested an urgent meeting without providing details. Over the phone, the assistant commissioner was a woman in her late 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone who entered her presence. She had built her career on investigating misconduct within the police force, and had a reputation for being both thorough and fair. Detective Inspector Blake Morrison said, as she gestured for Marcus to sit down. Your request for an urgent meeting suggests this is a serious matter. How can I help you? Marcus handed over his report and waited while Morrison read through it carefully. He watched her expression grow increasingly grave as she absorbed the allegations against Harrison and the evidence Marcus had compiled. When she finished reading, she set the document down and studied Marcus intently. These are very serious allegations against a senior officer in one of our most sensitive units, Morrison said finally. Before we proceed, I need to ensure you understand the implications of what you're reporting. This investigation will inevitably become known within the Royal Protection Unit, and it will affect not only DCI Harrison, but also the entire team's effectiveness and morale. Morrison explained the process that would follow if she decided to proceed with a formal investigation. Harrison would be immediately suspended from his duties pending the outcome of the inquiry. His access to sensitive information would be revoked, and he would likely be transferred away from royal protection work regardless of whether the allegations were proven. The investigation itself would involve multiple agencies and could take months to complete. I also need to warn you about the personal risks you're taking, Morrison continued. If these allegations prove unfounded, your relationship with your colleagues will be severely damaged. Some will see you as someone who destroyed a respected officer's career based on insufficient evidence. Your own career progression could be affected, particularly within specialized units that rely heavily on trust and loyalty. Marcus felt his stomach clench as Morrison laid out the stark realities of his decision. He had focused so much on whether Harrison might be corrupt that he hadn't fully considered how the investigation would affect his own future. The Royal Protection Unit was a small, tight-knit community where reputations mattered enormously. On the other hand, Morrison added, if your concerns prove justified, you will have prevented potentially serious damage to royal security and upheld the highest standards of police integrity. The decision to come forward, despite the personal costs, demonstrates exactly the kind of character we need in sensitive positions. Morrison asked Marcus to walk through his observations in detail, probing for any inconsistencies or alternative explanations for Harrison's behavior. She was particularly interested in the financial evidence and the document Marcus had seen on Harrison's computer. Her questions were thorough but not hostile, designed to ensure she had all the information needed to make an informed decision. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, Morrison made her decision. Based on what you've presented, I believe we have sufficient grounds to initiate a formal investigation. The combination of financial evidence, behavioral observations, and the document you witnessed creates a picture that requires professional scrutiny. Morrison explained that the investigation would begin immediately, but would be conducted with absolute discretion to protect both Harrison's rights and the integrity of royal security operations. A team of investigators from outside the Royal Protection Unit would be assembled to avoid any conflicts of interest or accusations of bias. Marcus left Morrison's office, feeling both relieved and terrified. The decision had been taken out of his hands, but the consequences would still affect him profoundly. As he walked back through Scotland Yard's corridors, he wondered if his colleagues would ever look at him the same way again. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work to find the Royal Protection Unit buzzing with rumors and speculation. Harrison had been called to a meeting with senior management first thing and hadn't returned to the office. Word was spreading quickly that something significant was happening, though the specific details remained unclear. By lunchtime, an official announcement was made. DCI Harrison had been temporarily reassigned to administrative duties pending a routine review of security procedures. The explanation was deliberately vague, designed to minimize speculation while the investigation proceeded. However, Marcus could see from his colleagues' reactions that few believed the reassignment was truly routine. Detective Sergeant Lisa Williams, one of Marcus's closest colleagues in the unit, approached him during their afternoon break. Lisa was a veteran officer who had worked with Harrison for several years and held him in high regard. This whole situation with Harrison is bizarre, Lisa said, studying Marcus's expression carefully. He seemed fine yesterday, and now he's suddenly being moved to a desk job. Do you know what's really going on? Marcus felt the weight of Lisa's scrutiny and realized that his colleagues might already suspect his involvement in Harrison's reassignment. The timing was too coincidental. Marcus and Harrison had been working closely together just before the reassignment was announced. I'm as surprised as everyone else, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. Management decisions often seem mysterious from our level. Lisa didn't seem entirely convinced by Marcus's response, but she didn't press the issue. However, Marcus noticed that several other colleagues were watching their conversation with obvious interest. The small, close-knit nature of the Royal Protection Unit meant that any major change affected everyone, and suspicions would inevitably develop about who might have been involved. That evening, Marcus received a phone call from Assistant Commissioner Morrison updating him on the investigation's progress. Preliminary financial inquiries had confirmed Marcus's research about Harrison's expensive lifestyle, and the questionable timing of his major purchases. The investigators were also examining Harrison's computer and phone records to look for evidence of unauthorized communications or data transfers. "The initial findings support your concerns," Morrison told Marcus. "We're treating this as a potentially serious case of corruption and possible breach of national security protocols. The investigation will likely take several more weeks, but I wanted you to know that your decision to come forward appears to have been justified." The validation provided some comfort to Marcus, but it also made the situation more real and more serious. If Harrison was indeed corrupt, the implications for royal security could be enormous. Marcus realized that his anonymous tip and subsequent investigation might have prevented a major security breach that could have endangered the royal family, as Marcus prepared for bed that night. He reflected on how much his life had changed since receiving that mysterious envelope just 2 weeks earlier. The simple decision to open an anonymous note had set in motion events that would define his career and possibly affect the safety of the most protected people in Britain. The file that could end careers was finally being opened by the proper authorities, and there was no turning back from whatever truths it might reveal. 3 weeks into the investigation, the atmosphere within the Royal Protection Unit had become increasingly tense. Harrison's absence was felt daily, as his expertise and institutional knowledge had been crucial to many ongoing operations. Temporary reassignments from other units had filled the immediate gaps. The disruption to established routines was obvious to everyone. Marcus found himself walking a difficult line between appearing normal to his colleagues while dealing with the stress of knowing he had initiated the investigation that was tearing their unit apart. He attended briefings, completed his assignments, and participated in conversations as if nothing had changed. But the constant awareness of his secret role was exhausting. The investigation team had expanded as the scope of Harrison's potential misconduct became clearer. Assistant Commissioner Morrison called Marcus to another confidential meeting to brief him on developments that would soon become official. The news was worse than anyone had anticipated. "We've uncovered evidence that DCI Harrison was systematically collecting and selling sensitive information about royal security arrangements," Morrison informed Marcus grimly. "Bank records show regular payments from offshore accounts that we've traced to entities with connections to foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had suspected Harrison of corruption, but the idea that his supervisor might have been working for foreign agents or organized criminals was almost unthinkable. The implications for royal security were staggering. Years of sensitive information could have been compromised, putting the entire royal family at risk. Morrison explained that Harrison's activities appeared to have begun shortly after his promotion to the Royal Protection Unit, coinciding with his sudden lifestyle improvements. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated operation involving encrypted communications, coded meetings, and carefully structured financial transactions designed to avoid detection. The information he sold included detailed security protocols, personal schedules, safe house locations, and even medical information about royal family members, Morrison continued. Some of this intelligence was used to facilitate unauthorized surveillance and photography, but we're concerned that more serious applications were being planned. The scope of the betrayal was overwhelming. Marcus realized that Harrison's friendly mentorship and professional competence had been a facade hiding years of systematic treachery. Every conversation they had shared, every security operation they had worked on together, had been compromised by Harrison's dual loyalty. Morrison also delivered news that Marcus had been dreading. "We'll need you to testify formally about your observations and the decision-making process that led to your report. The case will likely go to trial, and your testimony will be crucial to securing a conviction." The prospect of testifying against Harrison in open court filled Marcus with dread, but he understood its necessity. The evidence needed to be presented by someone who had witnessed Harrison's suspicious behavior firsthand. Marcus was the officer who had first raised concerns about his supervisor's activities. Over the following days, Marcus noticed significant changes in how his colleagues treated him. Word had somehow leaked that he had been involved in the investigation that led to Harrison's downfall, and reactions were mixed. Some officers quietly expressed gratitude that he had uncovered corruption within their ranks, while others seemed to view him as a traitor who had betrayed a respected colleague. Detective Sergeant Williams confronted Marcus directly during a quiet moment in the office. "I know you reported Harrison," she said bluntly. "Some people are calling you a hero for exposing corruption, but others think you destroyed a good man's career over nothing. Which is it, Marcus?" The question forced Marcus to confront the moral complexity of his situation more directly than he had been willing to do. "I reported behavior that concerned me," he replied carefully. "Investigation determined whether those concerns were justified. I didn't destroy Harrison's career, his own choices did that." Lisa studied his face intently. "Do you really believe he was selling secrets to foreign agents?" "The Harrison I knew was dedicated to protecting the royal family. He saved my life during that incident in Manchester 2 years ago. It's hard to believe someone like that could be a traitor." Marcus understood Lisa's struggle to reconcile the Harrison they had known with the evidence of his corruption. Having the same difficulty, Marcus admitted, "But the evidence doesn't lie. Whatever good he did before, he was also betraying everything we stand for." The conversation highlighted the human cost of Harrison's betrayal beyond the obvious security implications. His colleagues were struggling to understand how someone they had trusted and respected could have deceived them so completely. The revelation was forcing everyone in the unit to question their judgment and wonder if they had missed obvious warning signs. Marcus received another call from Morrison, with an update that would soon reshape the entire investigation. "Harrison has agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence," she informed him. "He's providing detailed information about his contacts, the information he sold, and the methods he used to avoid detection." Harrison's cooperation was revealing the full extent of his activities and their impact on royal security. The information he had sold over nearly 3 years had compromised dozens of security operations, endangered the safety of royal family members, provided foreign intelligence services with unprecedented insight into British security capabilities. Most shocking was Harrison's revelation about the anonymous tip that had started Marcus's investigation. Harrison himself had sent the note, hoping to shift suspicion away from his own activities by directing attention toward unrelated financial concerns. The irony was bitter. Harrison's attempt to mislead the investigation had actually led to his own exposure. His plan backfired because you took the allegations seriously and conducted your own investigation. Morrison explained, "Instead of dismissing the anonymous tip or focusing only on the financial issues it raised, you observed his broader behavior patterns and noticed the real indicators of his corruption. The news about Harrison's authorship of the anonymous tip added another layer of betrayal to an already complex situation." Marcus realized that from the very beginning, Harrison had been trying to manipulate him, using Marcus's integrity and dedication to duty as weapons in his own desperate attempt to avoid detection as the investigation moved toward its conclusion. Marcus found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned about trust, duty, and moral courage. The experience had been devastating in many ways, destroying his faith in someone he had respected and admired, while forcing him to confront the loneliness that came with making difficult ethical choices. Yet Marcus also recognized that his decision to investigate and report Harrison's suspicious behavior had been vindicated by events. The corruption had been real and serious, threatening the safety of the people he had sworn to protect. By choosing duty over personal loyalty, Marcus had fulfilled the highest obligations of his profession. Even though the personal cost had been enormous, the file that could end careers was finally being closed. But its impact on everyone involved would last for years to come. The trial of David Harrison began 6 months after his arrest, drawing intense media attention. Despite strict restrictions on reporting details that could compromise ongoing royal security operations, Marcus had spent weeks preparing for his testimony with prosecutors, reviewing his observations and the timeline of events that had led to Harrison's exposure. On the morning Marcus was scheduled to testify, he stood outside the Old Bailey feeling the weight of history and responsibility. Inside that courthouse, he would have to describe publicly how he had investigated and ultimately betrayed a man who had been his mentor and supervisor. The testimony would be recorded permanently, becoming part of the official record of one of the most serious breaches of royal security in decades. Marcus entered the courtroom wearing his best suit. Having been advised that civilian clothes would be more appropriate than his police uniform for this proceeding, the courtroom was packed with journalists, legal professionals, and observers from various government agencies, all focused on understanding how such a serious security breach had occurred within one of Britain's most trusted institutions. Harrison sat at the defendant's table, looking older and more fragile than Marcus remembered. The months of investigation, arrest, and preparation for trial had taken their toll, transforming the confident, authoritative officer Marcus had known into someone who seemed almost broken by the weight of his crimes and their consequences. When Marcus was called to the witness stand, he felt every eye in the courtroom focused on him. The prosecutor, a senior barrister with extensive experience in national security cases, guided him through his testimony with careful precision. Marcus described receiving the anonymous note, his initial reluctance to believe the allegations, and the gradual accumulation of evidence that had forced him to act. Detective Inspector Blake, the prosecutor asked, "When you first observed DCI Harrison's suspicious behavior, did you consider the possibility that your concerns might be unfounded?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "I desperately wanted to be wrong. Harrison had been a mentor to me, and I respected him enormously. The idea that he might be corrupt was almost unthinkable." The prosecutor led Marcus through each incident he had observed, from Harrison's expensive lifestyle to his nervous behavior around classified files. Marcus testified about the evening he had seen Harrison working late with sensitive documents, and the crucial moment when he had discovered Harrison's unauthorized compilation of royal security information. "What ultimately convinced you that you needed to report your concerns?" the prosecutor asked. Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "When I saw him preparing what appeared to be an unauthorized summary of sensitive royal security information, I realized that the safety of the royal family might be at risk. At that point, my personal feelings about Harrison became irrelevant. My duty was clear." The defense attorney's cross-examination focused on Marcus's motives and the reliability of his observations. The lawyer suggested that Marcus might have misinterpreted innocent behavior, been influenced by personal jealousy of Harrison's success, or acted hastily based on insufficient evidence. "Isn't it true, Detective Inspector, that you were ambitious for promotion within the Royal Protection Unit?" the defense attorney asked pointedly. "I hope to advance in my career," Marcus admitted, "but not at the expense of destroying an innocent colleague. The decision to report my concerns was the most difficult I've ever made professionally." Defense attorney pressed harder, suggesting that Marcus had conducted an unauthorized investigation of his superior officer and had violated Harrison's privacy by looking at his computer screen without permission. Marcus acknowledged these actions, but explained that they had been necessary to determine whether his concerns were justified. "I understand that my actions were irregular," Marcus testified, "but when you suspect someone in a position of trust might be compromising national security, normal procedures become inadequate. I had to know whether the royal family was at risk." Throughout his testimony, Marcus was acutely aware of Harrison watching him from the defendant's table. Their eyes met several times, and Marcus saw a mixture of resignation and what might have been understanding in his former supervisor's expression. It was as if Harrison recognized that Marcus had done what duty required. Even though it had destroyed their relationship and Harrison's career, the trial revealed the full scope of Harrison's betrayal in devastating detail. Evidence presented by the prosecution showed that he had sold information about royal security arrangements to contacts representing foreign intelligence services, organized crime groups, and tabloid media organizations. The payments he received totaled over £300,000 over 3 years, explaining his ability to afford his expensive lifestyle. Most damaging was testimony from intelligence experts about the potential consequences of Harrison's actions. The information he had sold could have been used to plan attacks against members of the royal family. compromise their personal safety, or gather intelligence for foreign governments seeking to understand British security capabilities. When Harrison took the stand in his own defense, he offered a full confession and apology that was both heartbreaking and damning. He described the financial pressures that had initially motivated his crimes, including gambling debts that he had hidden from his colleagues and superiors. What had started as a single transaction to pay off creditors had escalated into years of systematic betrayal. "I want to apologize to Detective Inspector Blake," Harrison said, his voice breaking with emotion. "He did exactly what a good officer should do when faced with suspected corruption. I put him in an impossible position, and he chose duty over friendship. That's what we're supposed to do in the police service." Harrison's testimony confirmed that he had sent the anonymous note in a desperate attempt to deflect suspicion from his own activities. He had hoped to create confusion by raising unrelated concerns about his finances, never anticipating that Marcus would conduct such a thorough investigation of his behavior. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty. Verdicts on all charges. Harrison was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the judge noting that his betrayal of trust had been particularly egregious given his position within the Royal Protection Unit and the potential consequences for national security. In the months following the trial, Marcus found his career transformed by the experience. He was promoted to detective chief, inspector, and transferred to a new role within the Metropolitan Police's Counterterrorism Command, where his experience with security breaches and integrity investigations was highly valued. The Royal Protection Unit was also transformed by the Harrison case. New security protocols were implemented to prevent similar breaches, including enhanced financial monitoring of officers, regular polygraph examinations, and psychological evaluations designed to identify officers under unusual stress that might make them susceptible to corruption. Marcus's relationship with his former colleagues in the Royal Protection Unit remained complicated. Some viewed him as a hero who had protected the royal family from a serious threat, while others struggled to forget that he had been responsible for exposing one of their own. The division reflected broader questions about loyalty, duty, and the sometimes competing obligations that police officers faced 2 years after Harrison's conviction. Marcus received a letter from his former supervisor written from prison. Harrison expressed gratitude for Marcus's decision to report his suspicious behavior, acknowledging that continued silence would have led to even more serious consequences for royal security and Harrison's own moral degradation. "You saved me from myself," Harrison wrote. "I was spiraling deeper into betrayal and would have caused even more damage if you hadn't acted when you did. Your decision took courage, and it was the right thing to do." The letter provided Marcus with a sense of closure he hadn't expected. The man he had respected and ultimately helped convict understood that Marcus's actions had been motivated by duty rather than malice. The validation didn't erase the difficulty of what had happened, but it confirmed that Marcus had made the right choice when faced with an impossible decision. Standing in his new office overlooking the Thames, often reflected on the lessons learned from the file that could end careers. He had discovered that integrity sometimes required actions that felt like betrayal. Duty could demand personal sacrifice. That protecting the institutions and people he served was worth any professional or personal cost. The decision he had made that February morning, when he chose to investigate rather than ignore an anonymous tip, had defined his career and character. Marcus knew he would face similar moral challenges in the future, but the Harrison case had taught him that when duty and personal loyalty conflicted, there was really only one choice a good officer could make: